DisruptCRE. Thank you, Stephen, and the production team for pulling it all together. And I'm Bray Lee. I'm the Executive Director for the U.S. Green Building Council for Massachusetts. We're one of the stronger green building markets in the country, if not the world. And I'm excited to bring to you this panel on the science of building systems and how buildings and the way we put buildings together and operate buildings is changing, considering various technologies that have been recently introduced and are coming to us soon. A great group of people here. Suzanne Robinson from Vanderweil, thank you. Barbra Batshalom from Sustainable Performance Institute, thank you. And Kurt Roth from Fraunhofer. All experts in the science of buildings and how buildings come together. We heard a great panel just now about some of the technology and more on the transaction side of the business of commercial real estate. But I wanted to take a few minutes now to go through some questions, the same questions, and see if we can glean some new insights into real estate based on the physical asset behind the transactions, the buildings. And so, without further ado, panel, are you ready?
Absolutely. And your drinks are after this. So.
Yes, there are refreshments out in the hall, and they will be waiting for you after this panel. I'm excited also for all of you in the audience. Thank you for coming. We'll be happy to answer questions that you may have after the panel. It's exciting to see folks like you interested in changing real estate. The green building industry has been changing real estate for many years, and especially 15 years ago when the LEED system came out and created a checklist for performance of buildings, which really changed the way people thought about how buildings came together, and is continuing to ripple through the marketplace and improve these buildings and the underlying asset for real estate portfolios by improving building performance and improving the resulting productivity and health of building occupants. That was my USGBC pitch, so thank you. So let's go into the topic here today. I'm wondering, maybe Suzanne, we can start with you. What are the outside influences you're seeing now that will change the way we look at building design in the future?
So, am I on? Yes. So there are three main things. One of the things that we've been seeing is as climate change is becoming more and more of a public issue and becoming more mainstream, more and more of our clients are pushing to be able to message that they're doing something about that. And so as Gray was mentioning, USGBC has this LEED rating system that came out a long while ago, and so we've had projects over the years that have been pushing for LEED Platinum, the top level as a good distinguisher. In the last year or two, we've seen a huge uptick in net zero energy and even beyond E positive, because energy being that top tier is something that can sell depending on what type of real estate you have, and it attracts a certain type of clientele, especially depending on who your audience is and especially the younger generation. The second thing we've also been seeing, and this is more recently in the last few months, and it's coming more out of the New York City area, is the health and wellness issue. And so health and wellness is sometimes a little bit challenging because a lot of it translates to our projects of bringing more fresh outside air into spaces. So that's a higher level than minimum code. It does require more conditioning, so it then has to be creative on the energy side. And it's a kind of an extension of like filtered water systems. We never had Britas or anything several decades ago, but now that's common nature. And then the last thing that we've been seeing for probably about the last year or so is data. Data's become really big just across all our day-to-day lives, and how does that translate into our buildings? So we always have our general monthly utilities, but we're starting to look at projects of putting more and more smaller subset metering in place and understanding how the buildings are operating and having a data-driven operation-based system. Those are the three F's.
Thanks, Suzanne. Barb?
So, building on what Suzanne said, climate change and extreme weather events, those have driven regulations, and regulations are driving disruption in the market. Things like in Boston and Cambridge, the new building disclosure ordinance. So buildings now actually have that have to have an MPG sticker like your cars do. And if you can believe, for the past 100 years, we haven't had to do that. So you buy a car, it's $15,000, $30,000. You buy a building, it's $18, $60, $200 million, but you don't got that sticker. So the resulting, the impacts of issues around severe weather and climate change, which translate to regulation, are starting to disrupt the market in a way that we haven't seen before. I think the other two things are economics and business as usual. So business as usual in the design and construction world are pretty dysfunctional and have been for a long time. There's not a lot of value added in the process of decision making, and the connection between design and operations, well, basically there is no connection. There's a big chasm dividing the investment upfront in the capital design and construction, and then what happens over the life of the building, completely disconnected. Those things are starting to change. So the fact that the process of delivering a project is really dysfunctional is starting to change, and the disruption is both from the legal side and structural contractual agreements between the parties, as well as kind of outcomes and being held accountable for performance, which is a new dimension, which means that there's a lot of technologies and tracking and measurement that are now becoming required and more business as usual than they used to be. So I think it's both the economics and owners wanting more value out of the projects that they're investing in, and they need to be able to quantify and measure for their shareholders or for whomever they're beholden to what that value is and how that's impacting you know, the asset over the lifetime of its existence.
Just so you know where I'm coming from, we're an applied research and development organization, so we're looking out in the future in terms of what kind of technologies can help develop and help prove out. And I think my co-panelists have brought up several good points in terms of trends, in terms of things around disclosure and how that impacts things. I guess one thing I'll highlight, which hasn't come up yet, is the cost of photovoltaics. That's something where the cost of photovoltaic systems in the United States are much higher. The cost is much higher than in other countries, roughly about twice the cost that is in Germany on homes, 60, 70% higher than it is, say, in Australia. So I think this is something, as these costs come more into line with other countries, it has a potential to really transform what goes on with buildings, and particularly how power is provided to buildings, and in terms of sustainability, that could have a huge impact when you start getting close to grid parity and to or past grid parity for a much larger portion of the country.
Thanks, Kurt.
Welcome, Greg.
There we go. All right, there we go. Now, just articulating some of these different things, we're starting to see that the science of building systems is very broad. And we're going from the processes of design, the technologies available to meet design intentions, the negotiations between the parties involved in executing design, and eventually into operations of buildings. And now, of course, reaching out to professionals involved in transactions underlying why a building is being put together in the first place. One thing I wanted to point out was the recent acquisition of USGBC of the GRESB, the Global Real Estate Sustainability Benchmark, which is a way that capital markets are being able to evaluate the relative merits of the features of buildings, especially and in particular the green features like energy efficiency and indoor air quality. So these are things I think that will continue to connect the capital markets and the transaction side of the business with the actual underlying physical asset. But now, let's look at what is the driving force behind the changes that you're seeing in the design side of the real estate industry. So Suzanne, again, thanks.
Sure.
So I think we've kind of touched on them. The main ones talked a little bit about is the regulations. So whether it's the reporting or more often the codes are getting more and more aggressive, faster and faster. So your basement of the bare minimum you can do is going up quicker. And then the second thing is more the top part, the ceiling. There was the 2030 challenge that came out as a call for the industry, as design professionals, to get to net zero in our design of all buildings and lead that in helping owners to get to that level, whether they're asking for it or not. And AIA took it to the next level, to the 2030 commitment. We're actually starting to measure and understand how our buildings are operating and moving towards that. That then does start shifting the paradigm of how we go about designing and what questions we're asking in the approach. And it's an interesting thing. I've seen more movement in that than I'd ever expect, and I'm young and optimistic, so that's actually a pretty good thing. And then the third and final thing, oh, and then along with the ceiling is, of course, any voluntary rating system, whether it's the LEED or Living Building Challenge or others that you're seeing pop up more and more. And then the third thing, and I'm seeing this across the industries, not even just in our building professionals, the millennials are really pushing a lot of ways of just even how we're operating, what is the services as we're designing some of our residential high-rises, how are things, what's the path through, how is that all happening? And they grew up in a very different world than I even grew up with technology and how we're going about. And the way the progression of our technology from computers and phones has happened in the last couple of decades, we're several decades or generations behind in our buildings, and that's where the jump is now being really driven.
I think there are maybe 5 to 7 areas where these drivers are showing up. Building technology is kind of the obvious duh one, and maybe you'll talk more about that, but the evolution and emergence of new technologies like in-ocean or redwood systems that allow kind of wireless data collection of plug loads and energy, lots around energy quantification, around energy communication and tracking and feedback loops. Building technology is one driver because of the innovations that are happening there, whether it be from concrete to the use of bamboo to energy. Social media is one that we don't hear a lot about in our industry, but it has had a huge effect. So if you think of those in-ocean or redwood systems, you've got kind of sensors in outlets and plug loads. How can you gather that information? Guess what? Through Twitter. You can gather energy information through Twitter and parse it and categorize it and analyze it. So social media has a role. There's also another little story from a group called IOBE, in my own backyard or something like that. And there was an area, I forget where in the country, where they had serious problems when it rained with sewage, combined sewer overflow and sewage kind of coming up and kind of nasty, right? So the community had a kind of, I don't know if it was texting or email or social media, they had this thing where everyone signed up, and when there was a storm event, everyone got a message, don't flush. Seriously, don't flush your toilet. And that use of social media allowed the community to manage its sewage overflow. So don't underestimate social media. Design and construction, the use of simulation, whether it's through BIM, building information modeling, or other kinds of analysis and simulation, is totally a driver in changing the way people communicate, the way people cost things and do assessments, and the way problems get solved. So that's a big one. And then I'll just stop with life cycle, the concept of life cycle costing and life cycle kind of asset valuation, looking at what the operational impacts are going to be in a way, quantified in a way that hasn't been before.
Yeah, I would build on what Barbara was just talking about in terms of the role of information technology and how that's growing and will probably continue to grow dramatically. Both in the design process where BIM is being used increasingly more and more buildings, it's going to keep being pushed down into smaller and smaller buildings, allow you to have more, even greater tools with greater capability, which allow you to consider many more scenarios, do more optimization. And in the future, you can see that being integrated even more with operations itself, ways to optimize operations and close to real time. There are various software tools which are coming out which allow you to do real-time operation for cost and for energy, things like that. In terms of actual operations itself, again, a greater focus on optimization of operations, but also on detecting faults, more ongoing commissioning systems being embedded both into devices ranging from packaged rooftop units to building automation systems that detect when systems are not operating as expected, and allowing people to take action, providing close to real-time feedback to really give more intelligence to operations.
Thanks, Kurt. This is great to hear from, and I hope everyone's taking all the notes. I've spoken, presented with Barbara before, where we've each had like a half an hour to go through the topic, and this is fun to even condense it even more. Thanks, Barbara. Let's do the rounds again on this question. In what field of building systems and products do you see the biggest opportunity for disruption? And not PV this time, Kurt, something else. But Suzanne, why don't you start again?
I just take all the good answers at the front.
We'll jazz it up next time.
So in this one, actually, Kurt already hit on is controls. So as engineers, we design more and more high-performance buildings. It's kind of like if you took your old school cell phone to now your smartphone kind of element. We're able to get all those controls in there, but we don't have the user facing. So what's happening is we've got these really theoretically wonderfully well-designed buildings. Hopefully they get built in the right way, and then it falls down because what's happening is usually it's a maintenance person who's running this building, and you're needing a higher and higher level. Now, I know some towns, for instance, who they're starting to be putting out calls to make sure they're getting higher and higher facility staff to be able to operate these more complicated buildings. But there's becoming a backlash. It's like, why are you making it so complicated? Why can't you keep it simple? And so there's that dynamic that we're always wrestling with, but I think there's an opportunity there. We've come a long way even in the last 2 to 4 years, where a lot of the systems, so you have your ventilation system and your heating system working against each other because they weren't able to communicate, and the BMS, the building management system, is now starting to tie that together. And so we've made a lot of progress through that. But it's still now back in the day where as long as you're like a coder and you know what you're doing, you're okay. But how can we make it dummy-proof? How can we make it so we can bridge that gap between a really high-performance building and someone who's not that smart in knowing what the back end is? And I know we can do it because I don't know a lot about what's going on my smartphone, but I can use it, and it doesn't crash on me. It doesn't, depending on which brand you have, of course. But, so of all those elements. So I think that's where I see the biggest stumbling block for us as an industry is we're getting the technology, but we're not connecting it to the occupants, to the operation side of things.
That would totally be my first answer, but since it can't be, I totally agree with it. But I would say there are two other areas. One is in the design, visualization, analytics, quantification. So there are lots of tools that exist to do energy simulations and modeling, and there's lots of companies that are developing newer, better tools. Part of the problem is architects don't like numbers, and engineers don't love pictures, but those are the languages that they speak in. So there's still work to be done, and last night Gray and I saw a presentation of a large firm that's developing its own software to do kind of quick and fast analytics early in the project. So there's huge opportunity there. And there was a second thing, and I totally forgot it. But I think that analytics side is still, even though the market has a lot going on, we haven't hit a tipping point with the magical tool, the right tool. The other thing that I was going to say is supply chain. Supply chain sucks. Our supply chain is so disconnected. There's a lot of waste, a lack of valuable information. It's a big problem, and I'm talking about procurement of products in construction, not commercial consumer products, but B2B. So that's a big opportunity.
Well, I won't say photovoltaics, but what I will say is I think beyond the controls diagnostics area, the other area that it seems like there are a lot of interesting opportunities are around mass customization based on prefabrication, modular construction, going much deeper than it does now. When people build ships, they build as much as they possibly can in a factory-like environment where you have controlled conditions, where you don't have the weather outside to contest with, and you don't have people up at 200 feet in the air. And then they
do as much as they can in a controlled, high-quality environment and do the last-minute assembly last bit of assembly and connection on site, really working at the interfaces. That's something which decreases cost, improves quality, it decreases time. And that's something which is starting to get more prevalent and deeper into construction, but I think that's something over the next decades, particularly enabled by BIM and other kinds of tools such as that. This is something which has become more and more common and can really change to a significant extent how buildings are built.
Very interesting to think about, the proverbial 3D printed building, right?
I wasn't thinking of 3D printing of buildings, no.
Here they come. But Kurt, let me keep you on the mic there for a second with the last of the in-depth questions. Maybe, thinking straight into what Fraunhofer does, what technology has disrupted your industry and how?
Well, again, we're a applied research and development organization, so again, I think this is where it comes back to a lot of things around IT. It makes it a lot easier to do everything we do. Being able to do simulations of building energy consumption, which used to take, days, or you have to run them overnight, that you can do in a few minutes now. So you can do more detailed simulations, more accurate simulations. You can simulate a much wider variety of scenarios, and it makes it much easier to do things like that. If you're doing simulation for product design, CFD, computational fluid dynamics, heat transfer, airflow in buildings, all those things are greatly facilitated by the advances in IT and computing power and the sophistication of tools. So that's the biggest thing for our organization, I would say.
So I would say, yes, that would be one of my first answers too, is the whole use of, kind of the two big competitors in the space are Autodesk and Google, and both of them have developed many tools that have been revolutionary. I would say another one that I would like to be the answer is transparency, and transparency around products. There's a huge 800-pound gorilla, elephant, whatever, in the room of the health impacts of building products, including many that you're familiar with. But there is a move afoot to increase transparency. So there's a product, for example, that I just saw on my startup feed from Israel that has, it's some device that has a sensor, you aim it at a thing, and it tells you every molecule in the thing. And it can give you information about what the health impacts are.
That's a transporter.
A transporter, excellent. It's a thing. I don't know, it's a cute little thing. Anyway. Yeah.
No, that's a starter.
So there are things around kind of working around the barriers to get the information you need by putting it in consumers' hands, kind of like the recording industry, and we've seen a lot of disruption in other industries. I think technology and software are going to have a huge role to play in bringing transparency to this industry, despite the lobbies and huge interests that might want to keep it from becoming transparent. I think technology has a huge interest there, and I think the consumer population interest is rising for that, so I think it will converge in a way that could potentially be very profitable, which of course is the only thing that matters. Oh.
So it's interesting. We hadn't talked about all our answers ahead of time. At my company, I oversee a department where all we do is modeling day in and day out. And I don't really see that as big of an impact. And it might be because in the last 10 years, it hasn't been too onerous other than CFDs, on how much time it takes. I think that is a big element. There's a whole harnessing the cloud, which is debatable on how much that's helping. I'm going to go with Kurt's answer in that in my lifespan in sustainability design, the PV market pushed us from doing a LEED Platinum project to now being able to really target net zero energy on most of our projects, or at least consider it, which we'd never been able to do 3 years ago because of two main things. China got ahead of us, and they're able to produce it really cheap, but the only reason why they were doing it is because of what was partnered with that is the incentivization that was done way more than anything that we see in the US, where Germany, the amount of PVs they have in their country, the amount of energy that's produced. We see this also in other countries in Europe, Canada, and other elements. We're behind on that, and I think there's a slow realization on that. There's a question on whether or not we have a mindset as a country to set the incentivization in that. But I think we are, I'm hoping on a global level there's seeing that we're not being the leader on that, and there'll be a push to say, hey, we've got to start bringing it up. If nothing else, they've dropped the price. And if you look at the studies, and I think Kurt, you probably study this a lot more than I do, the proposed cost of PVs is going down more and more, and where the focus is, that's the mainstream panels we have on roofs and stuff, is on the peripheral, because that used to be on the peripheral, now it's on the mainstream. And the amount of R&D and technology, whether it's just emerged and it's building integrated PVs, whether it's your roof tiles or whatever it is, there's some technology now where that window could be producing PVs and we're going out. The level of efficiency isn't there yet, and that's where the technology needs to be driven. The latest one I learned about on my flight in the little magazine, so you can learn anywhere, was about R&D where they had they raised about $2 million or so through crowdsourced funding, and they're looking at PVs and capitalizing on, what about the roads? We're not utilizing that. It's a really exposed surface that's absorbing a lot of PVs. And so the initial round of it is still having an issue with resiliency, the durability, but it looks like actually we're not too far away from actually having our parking lots producing energy. And so there's a lot of technology there that once that can hit the market, it's going to be a little bit on the cost side, but then if we can bring it down, we have so many projects that are desperately needing, we're pushing the energy use down, and we're developing in tighter and tighter urban areas. We don't have a lot of square footage to place PVs on our roofs or on our facades, so how can we utilize everything else? I think that's where the next generation, hopefully I'll see in my lifetime.
Cool, very interesting to hear about. We're going to shift into the next segment where I really appreciate you all just to sort of keep it at 15 seconds for your responses. Nothing will really happen to you, but you know, we want to do this little speed round. And let's start with Barbara, and we'll go to Kurt, and then Suzanne. Want to know what's one new approach and or systematic process leading to higher performance buildings, and perhaps you can describe one product or one vendor that you really like for this.
In terms of process?
Well, if it's
A process, there might not be a vendor, but it may be something that you've seen someone with a product that supports that process.
Oh boy. Yeah. I hadn't thought about this before. There are a number of different emerging software, new products that are more in startup mode around. So a big barrier in design right now is the fact that the default method is a very siloed, disconnected, disjointed process. And what we're trying to get at is a more integrated process, which in software development is called agile programming or whatever. So it exists elsewhere, so if it is being done, it can be done. Anyway, our industry is very broken most of the time, and decisions get made in pockets which really doesn't optimize the outcome or achieve performance. And there are a number of startups that have different kind of platforms for decision making to facilitate this process. One of them, iLive, is the company that does the USGBC's back end, not the front end that people complain about, but the back end that works really well. So there's this whole move between using social media and using these software platforms around collaboration. So, and collaboration's out there in a lot of software pieces, so that would be my answer.
Sure, I guess one product which I would love to see out there would be addressing retrofit situations, because if you look at the climate challenges we face and you think about what we want to try to achieve, say in the next 20, 15 years, new buildings are going to have a small portion of that, but we have to address the existing buildings. And one of the biggest needs by far is a retrofit solution for walls of existing buildings that is cost effective, that gives very high thermal performance without creating durability, mold, moisture problems. That does not exist today. That's something which is critical to be developed to help address these challenges in the future. And this is where potentially modular
construction prefabrication techniques could play a big role, leveraging IT to help scope out and customize a solution for a specific building.
I went last and I can't think of anything still. So the approach, it's always been there, is the software analysis we talked about of energy modeling, daylight modeling, stuff like that. This building we're in is a good example. So we were the engineers on this project, and we worked hand in hand with the architect. And what we did was we did modeling upfront to help influence, with the budget and the timeline and all the other design considerations, what could we do to reduce and optimize the solar gain so we don't have undue loads. And so we're working on just reducing the loads to begin with. And so it was a collaborative approach. Software isn't quite there, but I think I'll piggyback off of Barbra's, where the only one that I'm aware of it is through Autodesk, is the Visario and the Green Building Studio, where they're starting to set that up where on a single platform, everyone's participating and understanding all the inputs and outputs, and you're not having to have one person do it, send the report over an element. This has been around for a while, but I have to say it's been interesting, partly because of regulation, is part of because of more of the questions. It's becoming mainstream on almost every project that we're working on within a certain type of, programmatic size element. We're moving away from the rules of thumb that the design professions have used for so long, and we're chipping away and fine-tuning it more and more, and that's where the feedback cycle is very important to understand the theoretical design versus the actual operation.
And actually, y'all answered the second question in the series already with, what is the one product that needs to be designed or developed, but Barbra has one more idea on that.
I'll take both. The one thing that is not out there that we really, really need is storage, energy storage. I mean, there are energy storage products, there are companies that are working on it right now. But as Suzanne was saying, cost effective, yeah. As Suzanne was saying, we're working with the city of Cambridge to create a plan to get to net zero. But if you build a building in Cambridge, depending on what's going on in that building, it's very hard to build it to be net zero, really, on site, because there's not much site unless you cover the building in PVs that don't exist really yet in the market. The question is, if you can generate, the city of Cambridge owns large plots of land in Lincoln and other places. If we can generate the energy that we need, but we can't store it, and we need to work around the utilities, who, if anyone is here from the utilities, are not always helping us solve these problems. In fact, can be barriers. That's a huge innovation area that we desperately need to advance.
Any other quick thoughts on the product you'd like to see out there? Okay. We could be asking you questions all afternoon. 10 years from today, we'll start with Suzanne this time. 10 years from today, name one thing that'll be the same in building design, construction, and operation.
Here's where the plot thickens. I think I'm kind of in a different position than what Kurt had said, where I think the one thing that's tried and true that we'll always see, just dealing with the clients that we always see on projects, is customization. We're never going to have, we'll work on big box projects that are, have 200 stores across the country, and they try to standardize it as much as it is. Every single one is unique, and as we're pushing for the high performance, you're never going to have just a standard approach. And I think that's one of the things that you have to understand within the building industry versus we're service-based. You're not buying a building off the shelf and then putting it on your lot. I think I've seen that ebb and go, and I'm not sure if that's ever going to happen, maybe a little bit on the residential. But you'll never see that. This building was built to be unique, to be that showcase for Innovation Center. All these buildings around are always going to have their own flavor, because that's how you distinguish yourself from your neighbor. That's how you're selling yourself. And so this was interesting, because that magazine was really interesting on the airplane. Because what it is so Ralph Lauren, the designer, has this new smart shirt that was just utilized or showcased at the World, what's the tennis thing? So whatever.
The US Open.
The US Open, thank you. And so the ball boys were using this shirt, and what it had is woven into the fabric ways to collect the heart rate, the temperature, all this stuff so we can get the data, machine washable. And I was like, why can't our buildings get to that? And that's because they can do this in this isolated thing, and all it is a plug and play, and you put that one shirt on. When we're looking at our buildings, there's so many complex things, whether it's the cafeteria over there, or this or that the plug and play things go from one, well, okay, we have a shirt, pants, and shoes, let's say. So 3 things, right? And maybe other stuff, but, you know, you can count them on my hands. So a building where you're getting exponentially large and the dynamics of how they all operate, you can't do it that way. And I think that's always going to be one of the things we have to be aware of between the industries of when you buy a product versus a service base, which is how we design our buildings.
Well, I guess one thing I would say is I think one thing that'll definitely do the same are in operations, in particular people. People, human systems, organizations, culture, these things just don't typically change very quickly. And so I think that a lot of things will be tried, some things will work, a lot of things probably won't, but we'll have to really work and make things work for people. And I think things that have a people-centered approach to make it easy for people to achieve what they want to achieve, instead of trying to make people conform to what they think they want to do. I think that's what's going to succeed, but people are going to be at the center, should be at the center of it.
So I was going to also say people, but from a different angle. The previous panel, the answer was around relationships, and so it's going to be relationships. I think that's true. One thing about this industry is, if you're an entrepreneur and you're in a startup or wanting to be, this industry is unbelievably conservative. Unbelievably conservative. And I've been an advisor to a number of startups of very different kinds. And I don't care how fantastic your product is or your solution, if it will require the players to move out of their comfort zones financially or any other way, it's not going to succeed. So you have to really take, and in 10 years, it's not going to be any different. It's going to be a very, very conservative industry that is slow to change and really needs to make the bottom line work. So whatever aspect that gets involved through disruption or innovation has to take that into account, that heavy, heavy conservatism.
Some would call that prudence in investment management, but that's it, yeah. That's good culture. Thanks, Kurt, for pointing that out. That's underlying all of this stuff. We're now at the one-word answer section of our panel. So let's try to do that. Answering in, why don't we start with Barbara, since you just let go of the mic. One challenge. Name one challenge that architects and developers face when implementing new technologies in new development or retrofit projects.
Mindset.
Stories.
Cost and trust. So people want to be the cutting edge, not the bleeding edge.
Yes. Conservatism rules. So Suzanne, will these emerging technologies rapidly increase the speed of change of our new buildings? Are we truly on the verge of a Jetsons society with little bubble cars flying through the air?
No. No. But the climate change, Boston with the sea levels rising, will force it.
I would say we're not near Jetsons yet. We're still climbing out of the cave, in my opinion.
No to Jetsons, but I would say the dawning of grid parity or grid lower PV will change a lot of things in terms of how buildings are operated and how power is provided to buildings.
Kurt, again, how about tell us which city in the U.S. gets it the most with embracing building energy efficiency from the top down for its community?
If it were 15 years ago, it would have said Portland, Oregon. If it were, say, 5 years ago, it would have said New York with Plan NYC. Today, I'm not sure.
I'll say Boston.
I'm going to say none. And no, there really is. And we work across the country and internationally. In what it is, it's not the city. There's a disconnect between policy versus practice versus design and research. So when I say practice, that's the operational side. That's where you see the difference, is those people who can connect.
If I could just add a country, I would say Germany.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Roth. Barbra for pointing out.
Dankeschön.
Barbra, and then around to Kurt and Suzanne. What's the most important app for you in your business?
Oh, in my business, Salesforce. I use Salesforce day and night, more than I want to.
As an applied R&D organization, none really.
So for day-to-day work, none, but LinkedIn brings a lot of information that I don't have time to go through newsletters. So I'll read what my peers are posting, and those are a better collection than any organization sends me.
I will be posting this on LinkedIn later.
But I just swallowed them.
And then, Kurt, what's the most important device for your business?
It remains a computer.
So mine is the software that we're using for building performance analysis, which means we need the computer, and we're going from gut to science.
Imitation is the highest form of flattery. I'm going to go with my brain. I love that answer best. And I have to say it's good.
Well, thank you very much. Could I get a round of applause for our panelists?